Not very even, this whole space right there.
One sec. Okay, you're good.
Okay, welcome everybody to Planning Commission for August 14th, 2024. We'll start with, let's see, Matt Larson is on the prayer tonight. You have one?
A prayer?
Well, let's do the prayer.
I could do a prayer.
Yeah, the prayer. Let's do the prayer.
I got this.
So we're going to have a pinch hitter. You can even give a thought if you want to. No pressure.
My thought, you want, now?
Yes.
Okay, my thought would be that sometimes we want and desire for something and even pray for something and it doesn't come. And it certainly doesn't come in a timely manner. But with consistency, it does come and good things happen, and forgiveness and kindness, whether it's politically or in the city or just with neighbors or friends or family, is very important.
Okay, very good. I love that. Okay, we'll start with a prayer and then we'll do a pledge of allegiance. Yeah.
Father in heaven, we are grateful for the opportunity to be gathered together again as Planning Commission, and we pray, Father, that we will be able to understand truth and we will be able to do what is best for the citizens of this city. We are grateful for this opportunity, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I
pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, Vice Chair, for pinch hitting. I appreciate that. We've got two business items on the agenda, and then some things for the director's report. We'll go through the minutes and then a training. So item one, public hearing on the zoning code amendment proposal, 12.41, commercial plan developments as a legislative action. Who is leading us on this? Mr. Eggett?
I am, yeah, I'm just trying to get to it.
You have the floor.
Thank you. Pull it up here. Okay. So the applicant tonight is Jeff Legacy Partners LLC. They're represented by they are obviously a local property owner, and they also have offices here in Centerville City. And they're over in the Legacy Crossing District. And they have lots 2 and 3 of the Legacy Crossing PDO, I guess you'd say master planned area. So anyway, they're requesting an amendment to section 12.41.060 of the zoning code to allow a development agreement amendment that would allow for impact and or even presuming control, if you will, if there was a conflict between legal standards between the PDO code and a development agreement. The rationale for this is provided by a new state code that was just barely adopted in May of this year. That's how new we're talking. And now that, I guess that's not true. There was a previous amendment that allowed for this, and then they've added even further amendment in May of this year to what was previously done last year. But that being said, 10-90-532 development agreements, it allows a legislative body to approve a development agreement in accordance with the same procedures for enacting a land use regulation, including a review and recommendation from the Planning Commission in a public hearing. And you can see that in Article 2, I guess it'd be 2A3, that's on your screen there, near the bottom of that subclause 3. Go back up, Jennifer, it's just back up a little bit, right there, 2A3 is where that's reflected. And so they've provided in their submittal, new Article 7 is what I called it, of 12.41.060B 7. I guess not really article, it'd be new subsection 7. Their goal ultimately, as noted in the background, is for there to be a development of a future multifamily project on that southeast corner of the Legacy Crossing and Parish Lane development. That was phases 2 and 3 of their development project. And at one point, I don't know if this is still the plan, there was a conceptual plan that showed up to 216 apartment units. The long and short of why that matters is because the development agreement for the Legacy Crossing at Parish project area had certain caps of density for housing, and there was either a 15 per unit spread or 25 unit per spread based on the overall development and use of the area, as far as like the commercial and office and that sort of thing. And so other project developers in that area have maximized very aggressively that allocation of residential. So there's no more residential available within that area that they're partnered into with these other development participants in that common development agreement, if you want to call it that. So that's the long and short of the rationale. Now, as you look at it, hopefully you've had a chance to review the report, because I don't want to be obviously overly heavy with it, but there was a general analysis of the general plan and as guiding by the Centerville zoning code, 12.21.080E. Whenever we're talking about a zoning code or zoning map amendment, we need to make sure it's consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of our general plan. So the districts that did reflect similar standards relative to PDOs were neighborhoods 1, 2, and 4, and then the West Centerville neighborhood plan within the general plan. You can see there's some brief discussions about the neighborhood 1 district, neighborhood 2 district, neighborhood 4 district. The reason that those are included is because this is being reflected as a broad amendment to the PDO overlay zoning. And so it could have implications in those areas were there ever to be a PDO, or even in area 4 there are 2 existing PDOs that are there located right now. But specifically where we're focusing on the West Centerville neighborhood plan, you can see there's a lot of analysis of the language found within the goals and objectives of that. And it's really interesting to summarize that long paragraph. There's a lot of discussion about preserving economic viability, providing for economic opportunity, creating, small commercial, mixed commercial, residential, conditional uses for larger retail. Again, residential component not to exceed 15 units per acre when calculating entire master planned area. There's a lot of terms that talk about that. I think the bottom of the paragraph is where there's the meat of this discussion. It says, this goal is an interesting directive in that the city ideally needs to take a balanced approach in providing adequate job growth opportunities for residents of the community while considering ways in which to provide residential properties in closer proximity to these job growth opportunities. That being said, residential properties generally do not generate the same amount of revenue received from properties developed for commercial businesses, but do provide the employees and customers for these commercial businesses to function and thrive. So again, there's a philosophical discussion here. Are we more focused on trying to drive retail and commercial opportunities without the households and the individuals to support it? Or do we want to have enough individuals and households to support that growth that needs to happen or can't happen without those households, right? It's a really tough chicken and egg discussion we're talking about here. And you'll see this throughout all over the city. Obviously, there's some areas that sometimes struggle economically in every city because there aren't enough households to support those economic development areas, and then they dry up and they become vacant or problematic areas in cities, right? So going further ahead, as you look at it, Section 12-430-2 provides the city's established policies for commercial developments of the general plan. It states that these commercial areas should be protected from encroachment of other uses to preserve local commercial service capabilities to enhance the city employment and tax base. And then it continues to say such developments not only add to the tax base of the community, they also provide significant sources of employment for area residents. The section continues to emphasize that such areas are important to the overall well-being of Centerville City and should be carefully planned to provide attractive business, office, commercial, and light industrial uses within the city. Going down through it, I've already talked about how it's tied to phases 2 and 3, but there is a current statement in their agreement, and this is really the core of why we even have this discussion about an amended development agreement. The current agreement states the use of phase 2, 3, and 4 shall be limited to general restaurant, general retail, and general office. And as I noted, this is one of the core reasons the applicant is requesting the zoning text amendment in order to allow for a potential future amendment for phases 2 and 3 to have multifamily residential listed as one of the uses provided for potential amendment to this existing development agreement. Another statement I should probably add it and further explore the numerical allocation for what is allowed in that area for residential use. Because again, we have maximized the cap fully within that area already as it's currently established. Let's see, there's one more thing I want to hit here. I do note there's a paragraph that starts with lastly. It talks about that we are in the process of rewriting the general plan, and so there is a caution there. I just have written, staff would recommend that city utilize caution in making land use decisions such as zoning text amendments that may contemplate changes due to the completion of the general plan rewrite. Just evidencing that, you know, there is a request here, there is a concern here, and there are findings even as recently as last year with the Zions Bank retail, or I guess you'd say west area report that was completed that does evidence that the commercial growth opportunities here are challenging, but we are going through a general plan rewrite that will also evaluate the city as a whole and look at areas including the west side to see what might be in the best interest in the long run from a long-range planning. So there's a lot of philosophical issues with this conversation here, even though it's as simple as a simple paragraph change, right? There's a lot in the mix going on. I think I'm going to read, though, this last paragraph in full because I want it to be on the record. I think it really helps the discussion. And it's where it says, in summary. In summary, the city has established in multiple places throughout the general plan its desire to support income, commercial income, and job growth opportunities. Within the Legacy Crossing project area, there is the Centerville Megaplex movie theater that has struggled a bit over recent years, and the applicant has articulated to city staff that more residences adjacent to the theater could be of benefit to the health and vitality of the movie theater and the overall Legacy Crossing project area. Historically, phases 2 and 3 of this project area have been identified for solely retail commercial uses and has not contemplated residential housing as a use. The city has also emphasized its preference that commercial opportunities be preserved as much as possible per the current development agreement. This being the case, there is recognition by staff that the addition of residential housing on phases 2 and 3 could be of benefit to the continued functioning and growth of the Megaplex movie theater success, and may also bring additional future commercial retail opportunities to the Legacy Crossing Planned Commercial Center. And then you could see that that I provided in your packet a modified variation of the applicant's zoning text submittal and limiting it to amended development agreements as opposed to just development agreements in general. And I'll explain in a minute why that is. But as you see, by relying on city council approval amended development agreements, the city would then be able to direct the terms of the amended development agreement as allowed for in and following the direction of Utah Code Section 10-90-532. The city leadership and staff could determine when, in narrower circumstances, an existing PDO commercial plan development could qualify for a development agreement amendment in order to assist an area of the commercial plan development that may not be functioning as well as previously expected or contemplated by following the PDO zoning standards of the Centerville Zoning Code. It's for this reason that city staff has provided the current recommendation in response to the applicant's request. So what I'm getting at there is, obviously we have a PDO policy and zoning code standard, and the rules of the game are all fair and equal for everybody, right? And in the future, even before this meeting, Lisa and I talked, that PDO ordinance can always be amended to better contemplate holistically throughout the city what makes the most sense for those areas to work. But what do we do when there's an area that is diagnosed to not be operating the way that those before us had hoped it would 8 or 10 or 15 years ago? In that situation, and are we as a city okay with having future dialogue about variation in the development agreement strategies therein, and therefore do we support the conflict potential of a development agreement that may not be in full compliance with the base standards of that PDO? So that was the one way to look at it, and that's why I made that recommendation within there. Obviously, I did provide, because I knew that there are a lot of ways to look at this, and there's a lot of philosophical differences of how to approach this. I provided you both with a motion as they provided that information, a motion with my recommended amendment. You can always table it for further dialogue if you want staff to investigate further and come back and have discussion and or have further discussion with the applicants. And then lastly, you always could recommend a denial if just for some reason you feel like given the findings or even additional findings, something doesn't feel right. You could go that route. So as far as what's provided, I provided you with a copy of the state code 10-98-532, or section 10-98-532. You'll see that there's the amendment to their zone code amendment proposal You'll see that there's the public hearing notice as one of the documents, the application that they've submitted showing that they made the payment. And then you'll see the amendment proposal, their brief statement for justification, and that would be the bulk of the documentation therein. So hopefully that helps in understanding where staff and where the applicants come from. This has been months in discussion, I think, with the applicant, trying to find solutions. And we're just trying to bring the discussion, I think, to the table to work through something that works as both benefit to the city as well as the applicant, and seeing that area be more successful than it has been able to be over the last, 10, 15 years plus? 14, yeah. So that, with that, Chair, I would defer to you how you'd like to proceed and go from there. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open up the floor for questions. Questions to staff?
I remember there was a discussion a while back with the city council on the Megaplex Theater kind of viability and standing within the city. Do you have an update on where the Megaplex Theater currently is with the city?
So, yeah, and I'll maybe even defer to Lisa to help me out on things I don't know, because she has discussed with the ownership that very issue. But the bottom line is their sales are improving from COVID. This year was better than last year, and it continues to be better. It's not quite to the levels that they're required to be at in order to qualify for increment. So the city council did give them basically a waiver, if you want to call it that, or we allocated still their increment generation, even though they didn't quite hit the revenue they're supposed to generate by that agreement. But again, it's still coming out of COVID times that has not been able to be accomplished. So the feeling from our finance director was next year, and I think even the ownership reflected as such, that next year they should be hitting that mark or exceeding it. They feel like this year was kind of softer for what movies were released. There was a bunch of bumping of movies, and that next year is going to be much stronger. But it is looking better. That being said, it's still not performing to 2019 numbers, but you did have big movies like Avengers Endgame and other things that really generated some serious revenue and got people in seats. On the flip side, the world's a lot different. You have more on-demand viewing, right? And fewer people are going to movie theaters. So again, that does legitimately play into this conversation and representation of the report. Yeah.
But they are investing funds to redo the seating to the higher end seating. That's the direction that the movie theater industry is going. They're hoping to sign a additional long-term lease with the lower bid. The tax increment is a tax increment incentive program, and they're required to sell 500,000 seats per year. They sold 495,000. So in my mind, they substantially completed that, and so they were granted one more year of waiver, but their projections show that they will meet that.
That they didn't quite hit the target.
They were only
expectation.
5,000 sales tickets off of the 500,000 requirement, so.
Is that for tax purposes?
Yes, to ensure, yeah, because some of the tax increment goes back to them, so we want to make sure that they're meeting certain
Performing,
benchmarks.
yeah, they're performing to their benchmark.
But yeah, I think it's going in the right direction for sure.
And then as you were mentioning here, this particular zone amendment is looking possibly to help out more housing in that area? Or is it more commercial development? Because
Neither. It's to the way it's being presented currently is to afford the conversation to look at amending the development agreement in a way that may not fully be in compliance with the PDO ordinance. Like if there's certain terms of the PDO ordinance, it can supersede it if agreed to between the city and the applicant with an amendment to the development agreement.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, to be clear, since this is newish,
Yeah.
so what you just said, if I heard you correctly, is what they want to have is basically final say if there's a disagreement? Am I misunderstanding?
The
Or is that
development agreement,
correct?
if negotiated between their side and the city to equal terms, right, and then agreed and amended, approved as amended, that, if it conflicted with the standards of the PDO, would have legal right over the PDO wherever there is a conflict.
I see,
Yeah.
I see.
And the PDO, or the development agreement is between the city and
The applicant
The
group,
applicant.
yeah. In this case, I think the PDO, I think the development agreement has 5 or 6 partner groups that are all,
Probably up to 10.
Yeah,
So the
maybe
development
it's that
agreement
high.
is with all property owners within the project area. When we entered into the development agreement, it
2 or
was
3.
US Development.
Yeah.
But every time they sold a new lot in there, each new property owner has to sign an assignment and assumption agreement, agreeing to comply with all the terms of the development agreement. So we have a lot of owners in there, and we're probably up to 10 or so owners, so.
And I believe you said southeast of the,
Yeah, of the Legacy Crossing area.
so is that like directly south of the Maverick gas station?
It's directly south of the Megaplex Theater. There's a
Directly
large,
south of the mega.
large area
Oh,
of
south-
undeveloped
southeast. For whatever
parcel.
reason, I was thinking
Yeah.
southwest.
Yeah.
Yeah, east of the apartments.
Yep, yep.
yeah,
Weed field.
yeah,
Basically just north of the cabinet place,
yeah. Well, yeah,
kind of,
kind, diagonal-ish,
Yes,
but yeah,
diagonal-ish.
yeah,
and next to the freeway. more
Correct.
close. Okay.
yeah, correct.
And what is that zoned as? I couldn't really tell on the map.
It's currently a commercial very high, CVH
With a plan development overlay.
overlay.
Yeah.
The very overlay that, yeah, we're talking about here.
And that PDO was, when was that implemented? How many
Oh,
years?
2010.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 14 years. My question that I'll also pose to the applicant, I'll pose to you. Why do we need this mechanism when we can already just go back and amend the PDO?
It's a fair question. The only thing I could say is state code has offered another tool, another opportunity to look at ways to work through development agreements to resolve it. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Chair, we could definitely look at an internal amendment to the PDO ordinance. The only issue is I guess the best way to answer your question is development agreement lets it be more targeted to an area specifically that you can diagnose or pinpoint surgically the issues and resolve the issues, right? Without having broad-based application to all PDOs in the community if you amend the PDO ordinance holistically.
But you could amend, so this development does have its own plan development overlay ordinance that we adopted that does have a lot of those standards, and that could be also
Yeah.
amended just similar to, but if you wanted to amend it for certain things, typically what we've done, we've amended it about 4 times. And you usually have to amend the PDO overlay zone, which is an ordinance that rezoning the property to a particular zone with all the requirements. And then we still have to amend the development agreement because usually there were so many details in the development agreement. And then they also have a lot of cross-access easements and agreements and things like that. So it gets complicated to amend anything.
And to your point, we have ironically a very similar, very, very similar request from a property owner across the way with the Maverick Commercial Center as it relates to the properties on the roundabout corners. Very similar discussion, very similar concerns, very similar requests. So again, to your point, if we amend the PDO ordinance as a whole, do we want to amend it in a way that it affects all PDOs? Like Lisa said, do we go and negotiate just their PDO overlay area, or do we look at even by development agreement? So there's different methods of how surgically you want to be allowing for these kind of conversations.
Okay. And in this particular instance, what's the blocker that we are trying to supersede in order to afford this particular development to be more economically viable? Is it the development agreement or the PDO?
That's a good question. I don't know, Lisa, what do you think?
Well, it's both and all, including the
kind of what I
general
would say.
plan and the zoning. So, and the applicant can probably speak to this, but essentially they were slotted to be retail and office spaces or restaurant, you know, other commercial uses that just haven't panned out. And it's been the same thing across the street. They have 2 commercial lots there on the roundabout, and they have not built out, and they even have tax increment waiting for them if and when they develop. And that incentive has not been sufficient to get commercial development.
Is that because the allowed units is not enough to make it economically viable? Like what we allowed in 2014 or 2010, 14 years ago?
Well, none of the parcels, lot 2 and 3 in Legacy Crossing, and then the other 2 lots are all commercial. So they don't allow, right now, none of them allow residential.
Yeah, I picked that up in the
But
report.
they do want to transition to, that's the request is, hey, can we just build these out as residential, because residential is working great over here.
The top paragraph of, I don't know which page that is, page 4, I evidence that. Currently, the agreement states that the use of phase 2, phase 3, they're wholly owners of phase 2 and phase 3, and phase 4 shall be limited to general restaurant, general retail, and general office. So they don't have the opportunity to explore any other uses besides those 3.
Without an amendment.
Right,
But, yeah,
exactly.
and originally, even phase, can't remember if it was 5 or 6, I think maybe 6,
Yeah.
was to be office along 1250 West, and that, they came in early on when they were building out 5 and said, hey, can we just put more apartments out here, and the city amended it and allowed more.
Yeah, that was
more
one of the
apartments.
4 amendments. Yep.
So is,
Amendments to
The development
The
agreement.
development
that was
agreement?
originally-
And the zoning.
And, oh, yeah,
and the zoning.
Yeah.
Okay.
so, but the reason that we're not being successful in getting other developments is because of a lack of housing?
Well,
Is that what I'm
that's,
understanding?
that's one of their postures. That's one of the positions
But this isn't
they've
something
taken.
we've been told by people who have approached us about development.
This is before my time, but there was a Zions Bank study that was funded by the city that had some evidence that it would be difficult to develop retail, commercial, more retail, commercial in that area, that there would be challenges. But again, I wasn't here, and I don't know how true or not that is. Maybe that's a more fair question to ask the applicant. I have been in meetings with the applicant group. They have evidence that they've been trying to broker the property without a lot of interest for many years. So that would be fairly evident. And that is evidence that I have heard from them.
And broker the property that you speak of that's next to the theater or
Yeah.
the other by the roundabout?
Next to the theater, not
Okay.
the other two at the other developer, but yeah.
I think it's important to highlight, tonight, we're not talking about the substance of whether those commercial pieces should go residential. We're
Yeah,
just talking
that's
about
true.
the tools and the mechanisms through a zoning code text amendment. So, but I think staff is just allowing you to have context to that text
That's
amendment.
right.
But
Thank you,
you
Lisa.
don't
That's
need to
right.
struggle with that decision whether they should go residential tonight. That's not the
Mm-hmm.
question.
Right. My question, and I'm going to continue on this, is not so much whether they go residential, it's how do we help them become economically viable, and how do we help anybody become economically
Correct.
viable? We shouldn't be standing in the way. We also have the obligation to make sure that the public's and the public good is, the public's voice and the public good is being looked out for. So my question is, if there's already a public mechanism, which is amending more difficultly, perhaps, the PDO and the zone and/or the development agreement, will this particular amendment, allowing a simple amendment to a development agreement, limit the amount of input and/or oversight that the public would have in that process? For example, I assume that a development agreement adoption and/or amendment would be subject to a referendum, correct? And I just don't know right off the top of my head how this changes the amount of public input that you would have on making a change to a land use regulation.
I guess my reading of section 109A 532 is to say we want just as much public input.
Right.
And based upon the Moab case that we discussed.
Yeah, we do require public hearing.
There must be as much public discussion of a development agreement if you're changing a land use regulation through a development agreement, as it should be, because you are changing something that the community thought is in your code, and then contractually, you're just gonna make an exception to that code without any process, so, no, you would have to make it go through the same process. But I do agree that I have some legal concerns with the development agreement option, not that I don't think it's a tool to put in our toolbox, but I would much prefer to change regulations or alterations in the plan development overlay because it's a legislative decision, it's clearly a land use decision, and it has all the framework already in place, like the appeal process, like the standard of review, all of these things that we're used to dealing with land use decisions and the public process. So we have that in place, whereas with development agreements, if we disagree, basically, it's a contract, and any dispute would go directly to court, to discuss that dispute. And then in addition, the concern that most city attorneys have with development agreements, including our insurance company, is that there's no governmental immunity for contracts. And so this is the Tooele case where they were sued over a development agreement and had to pay out millions of dollars because there's no governmental immunity. So we've been adding provisions to our development agreement saying, hey, we're not going to allow damages. We'll do specific performance. But anyway, so we're all quite concerned about using contracts for zoning or to alter zoning regulations, particularly when there's already something in place, which is our plan development overlay, which allows alteration of certain things. But I do agree with the applicant's premise that we should make it more clear in our code that with a plan development overlay, if this is the policy, let's just state it. In a plan development overlay, you can alter anything. You can alter general plan requirements, zoning code requirements, subdivision requirements, standards and specifications, anything but construction codes. I don't think we have the authority to alter building codes or plumbing, anything like that. But to the extent the city wants to, they can. And the tools for altering that, we should leave it open for the city, could be through the plan development overlay and or a development agreement. So we can decide what's going to be the best route, For Legacy Crossing, unfortunately, a lot of the terms and provisions in the development agreement mirror what's already in the code. And so they've had to amend multiple things because we say it in a lot of places, like density. We say density in our general plan. We require density in chapter 1241, and we also address density in the development agreement. So if you just take that one example, they really have to amend all of those anyway. But I think staff would be in favor of clarifying our language to allow those tools to be used, but it would be up to the city, obviously, within our discretion. But I much prefer a legislative rezone with broad discretion of reasonably debatable. I mean, I'm waiting for the next case, which is going to be, okay, we're going to litigate this development agreement. It was approved legislatively with the process, but the statute doesn't clearly say it's a legislative decision. So what is the standard of review when that goes up to the court next time? It says we can do it, but is the standard of review going to be reasonably debatable, which is a very high standard in favor of the city?
So is the city, maybe help the commission here on the rewriting and the process of the general plan? Does that encompass what we're talking about tonight? And if so, kind of where are we on the process, and would maybe some of the rewrites, incorporate what the applicant is requesting tonight?
So the general plan itself would be a long-range tool that would tell the city how we would want to see the west side to be developed in the next 15 to 20 years, right? From a very high perspective. It would give it's hard to, I don't have a crystal ball because the plan for it is to be completed in June of next year. So we're pretty early to the game. But the commentary there is that it would give very clear direction as to what the policies and planning are for the west side. And if there was a perspective from all the stakeholders and the residents that commented and our consultants, and eventually they'll come and do a public meeting with you and get your input, et cetera, right? That evidence that some of these concerns that are being brought up by a property owner are legitimate, then clearly that would put even more, it would make more clear policy directives to staff and the planning commission and city council to meet those directives by updating zoning codes appropriately to accommodate these types of requests that make sense, right? So if the general plan, through it, we find similar parcels throughout commercial areas that just haven't developed the way that everybody thought they would, it could provide directives that would then be, stable foundations to amend zoning code to meet those directives. Now, where are we at on the process? We've completed public input and stakeholder input. they're in the process right now of drafting that general plan. In fact, I have a review meeting with them a week from today to get an update on where that's at. We meet every 2 weeks. So they are in the process of starting to draft those updates right now. And they do have plans to come and meet with you at a later.
That rewrite won't really drill down to.
It can't,
As
because
granularly as.
that's
I
not its
think that
purpose.
There's two things in my
Yeah.
mind that may impact with the general plan rewrite, and one is, I think it is going to, the consultants have been asked to look at all of our density recommendations within the city, and so, yes, on the west side, it may alter those density caps that are currently there. Number two, staff has recommended that we take out from our zoning code, in many places in our zoning code, we make compliance with the general plan mandatory.
Yeah.
Most cities do not do that.
not
The
supposed to.
general plan should be advisory.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just like now, when you're saying, hey, whatever you're doing today in our zoning code, it has to meet the intent of the general plan, and it's just, we're looking back, and so, yeah, I think the density caps in the general plan should be very vague. Specific density caps should be put in the zoning code, so we're not constantly reaching back to something that's antiquated, or making these.
Overgeneralized.
It's a
Yeah,
recommendation
exactly, and
document,
so I think those will impact these areas in a beneficial way. But staff has also met, when Mike first came on, we've met with a lot of developers, because they want to get going on development, development's picking up. And so staff is partially supportive of these types of applications rather than saying, wait a year, I mean, we've been honest with them saying, you may want to wait a year because you may get what you want anyway with this analysis and the economic data that's going to come in and, the moderate income housing requirements, things like that. I think we are going to, bring up some of these requirements, but to also make them wait a year, we're supportive of them trying to make a few changes here and there, knowing that the general plan may change things, so.
So do we have an actual, a document where it's got the language that they're wanting to?
That's what they're currently drafting right now.
Oh, okay.
That's what's in process. So now that they've received all the public input and they've been, I think they're gonna actually do one more public input opportunity, but it's gonna be with draft concept of language to get some directives on that.
Will we have a hearing on
I
that?
think it's
or-
I think that's when you'll probably see them coming in is sometime later, either this year or the very beginning of next year, with that kind of information. That's when I suspect they'll come to the planning commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but I was asking on tonight's, on the applicants, do they have a document saying this is the text of the
Yeah,
the
can you go to
rewrite?
There is.
Maybe that we can put on the screen here?
Yeah, they've provided their version of it, and then you can see I provided an
It's at the
amendment.
very end.
It's at the bottom. Sorry
There
about
you go.
that, Commissioner Moss, I missed it.
So, yeah, it might be helpful to hear from the applicant at this point, and then we can talk about their specific language versus staff's recommendation.
And we still technically have to open a public hearing at some point, too.
All right. More questions for staff before we proceed?
So I've got one, just like where there's multiple zoning requirements of it shall not exceed 12 units per acre, shall not exceed 15 units per acre, or whatever the case may be. If now you've got a development agreement that, this one, 216 apartment units, this one varies from those other zoning requirements, now under this text, the development agreement will control.
Yeah, exactly. If the city agreed to that development agreement, it would presume, only over the PDO ordinances, though, in clarity to that, only over the planned development approval. Am I right, or am I wrong?
Yeah,
Correct
no,
me if I'm wrong, Lisa.
The language, the way they put it, that the development agreement controls, I would rather have the language just say, the city has the right to alter our own requirements through a development agreement.
There you go.
Rather than saying which one
Yeah.
controls, because the state law also says we cannot take
That's-
future
yeah.
zoning decisions away from future councils. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, obviously that's the way it works, once we agree to it, but I'd rather just state affirmatively that it's a variation allowed by development agreement or by zoning through the PDO.
You ready? Okay, so I'd like to open this for a public hearing. I'll ask the applicant to come forward, state your name and your address, and if you'd like to, well, sorry, not the public hearing. I'm just going to ask the applicant to come forward and give their response. My apologies, it's been a long day already. Tell us your thoughts, and you hear our questions, so we'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you. Glenn Gersberger with J. Fisher Companies.
Mitch Vance.
And we're probably better as two than as one. So we've been working on this for a long time. So as I mentioned earlier, it's been 14 years that we've tried to, take a round square and put it into a square box. And we've gone through several iterations to try and abide by the approved use for that lot. We've even gone so far as to design an entire property, go through all the plans, go through all the approvals, get to the permitting process to then, economically, it just could not make sense. So we've carried this property for a long time with significant expense, trying to meet these guidelines. And the reality is we've gone through our own studies and provided those to the city too, that the intended uses just are not economically viable. And I think the Zions report also reinforced those facts. And now we've come to full circle. How can we get something that will be economically viable there? We think we found it, but now we just need to find a way to get there. So we've been working closely with Lisa and Mike to trying to find a way to do that, whether that's through changing the development agreement or changing the PDO overlay. Either way, it doesn't matter to us. Whatever works best for the city and for you, because we want to work cooperatively with you in the design. Because if you look at not only the development agreement, but you look at the design guidelines within the development agreement 14 years ago, they don't make sense. So it kind of makes sense now to work cooperatively to get something that's going to be great for the city, great for us. We could wait for the general plan, but that's another year, 18, I don't know how long it'll take. But it just seems like we have a path. Can we find it and go down that path now versus waiting an entire year? Because I think we have a roadmap to get there. It's just whatever works best for the city.
Yeah, and I just add, we're not here to swim upstream. We've been before this group a lot for this site over the past couple of years. And as Glenn said, the private sector has found that it didn't work. Public sector, then this design study came out and said it didn't work. And as we've realized that, we've been looking at different options, and we hit this wall, and we started to realize all these different layers of code and general plan, all these things, and it was hard to discern how to move forward, right? So in our conversations, this was brought up as a good first step to open the possibility of managing this more on a specific scale rather than changing a zoning code or something that changes it all over the city. That's not at all what we want to do. It's a specific site with specific problems, and I think they're easily overcome negotiating between the city and us for that area. But we don't want to open the floodgates and make it a general applicable thing throughout the city. So whatever mechanism that is, hats off to those of you who aren't attorneys and have been able to keep up, because I've been trying. No, we have a couple. So it's complicated. Whatever the best mechanism is, we're here for it. I think we all have similar goals.
Okay, questions for the applicant?
Maybe just expound a little bit on the prior efforts that you claim weren't economically viable. Give us maybe some ideas as to what you entertained.
Yeah, initially, well, as you've seen out on the freeway, we've had a sign up there for at least 8 years. And we have had zero interest in that site for commercial use. Only because when you build commercial, you really want a nexus of other commercial properties around it. And that's what you have here.
On the east side.
On the east side. And it would be, the only thing that might make sense over there is a destination restaurant that people will go out and find, right? And Slackwater Pizza comes to mind, because people will go and find that location and they'll visit that. But does that one use justify an entire commercial use? It just doesn't. And what we found is that if you're really trying to support the megaplex, additional heads and beds are best to try and support that use. So we've had marketing and leasing going on for at least 8 years out there, focusing solely on commercial. We decided that maybe what we could do is not have strictly commercial and not strictly retail. Perhaps we could create a hybrid office commercial or office retail. So we designed these high bay,
Flex
Flex.
retail use.
yeah, where it would be an office in the front, retail in the front, office in the back, something hybrid. And it came, we went to pull a permit right at the time that we saw all of the construction costs go through the roof. So what we thought would be a $18 million project, all of a sudden became $36 million project. And the rents that we could achieve on that hybrid project just didn't justify moving forward. We'd be underwater day one. So that became economically unviable.
And maybe to answer a question you posed earlier, it's not so much that there needs to be more beds to make this commercial. That obviously is part of it, but the access at this location, the visibility is really great, right next to the freeway, but getting back to that parcel isn't simple and easy. So the idea, I think, for us is, you know, Centerville has kind of moved west side of the city. We were, you know, our development firm was some of the ones who went and built out there, and creating kind of a nexus out there. Right now, that residential, the U.S. Builders or whatever that's there, U.S. Development, is kind of alone. Hopefully, we can create kind of more of a symbiotic neighborhood where there are residences out there, there is commercial out there as it continues to grow. But right now, it just doesn't make sense for what it's listed as in the PDO.
Okay, so my question is, same question that I posed to staff. Why do we need this tool when we have a tool that exists? And it's coming from a place where two things are motivating me as a commissioner. Growth needs to happen, and we shouldn't be standing in the way, right? You guys have a constitutional right to develop. But at the same time, we shouldn't be wading out into deep waters with unintended consequences. This proposed amendment isn't just for you, it's for everybody. It's for every development agreement from here on into the future, unless or until this changes, right? So the way I view this is that this is a tipping point for all of the future multiverses where development agreements come in and we have to make decisions about them. And we have to anticipate what are the unintended consequences of allowing a development agreement to control. And some of those have been highlighted by staff, but I don't even know if I can think of some of them. That's why I'm always hesitant to wade into waters for which I may not be wholly aware of what could come. The motive for why you want this, I'm totally on board. Whatever we can do to make it economically viable is something that we should be doing. And in fact, I would hazard to say that previous councils and maybe even previous commissions have not been all that keen on making sure that you guys had enough density out there. I think that has changed, possibly in part by your indisputable evidence that it hasn't been able to work for the densities that you were allowed. This is where I'm stuck, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond. Why do we need this when we have one already, when using this comes with risks?
So what I would say, in my limited knowledge of all of this.
Sure.
If as it currently stands in the zoning code, if we can handle this through PDO and development agreement amendment, I think that's fine. We were told this is a first step. We've always been told it's a zoning text amendment, a development agreement amendment, a PDO amendment, and a general plan amendment. If this can be handled simply and more specifically through one of those mechanisms or a couple of them rather than all of them, this was just our first step that we were told to pursue. So we're open to whatever mechanisms are most legally and easily accessible for the city.
Right, because this mechanism, I think to your point, Mr. Vance, is that this is the most simple way to skin the cat.
Okay.
Otherwise, you have to skin it. in 4 different quarters with 3 different knives.
Right.
Well, I don't know, my analogy's falling apart very quickly, but you know what I mean.
Right, and as long as we can have a clear path of, to get to the goal of what is governing the property, I think that's okay. Right now, it's unclear. So as long as that is clear to us and agreed between us and the city, we can pursue it that way.
Yeah, and I would defer to Lisa, and she could probably guide us best on how to get that done. I think her suggestion with addressing the PDO overlay for this particular project, that's probably the best path. So,
I see. More questions?
Yes, but I don't know that they're specific to.
Are you requesting,
What we
and maybe this is better directed to staff, but would this be a change made for only certain zoning areas? Or is it just, just for this particular area? Help me out on, kind of to your point earlier, this is opening it up, but to what extent? To what zones particularly?
So with the new subsection 7, it is a text amendment to the plan development overlay zoning tool of our zoning code. So it would be available and also applicable in all situations that had a PDO overlay application, whether they're currently existing or requested in the future. That's why I even was suggesting, if we were to go that direction, as a recommendation to be an amended development agreement, so that new development agreements would still need to work within the confines of the plan development overlay zoning ordinance as constituted at the time of creation. But then if we had to surgically work with the developers on an amended development agreement to something that was favorable for economic vitality or opportunity to the city and the developer, we could explore that. But long and short, I guess to answer your question, the answer is yes. It would be available as a benefit or an impact to all plan development overlay zoning in the city, current and in the future if established.
But that plan development overlay zone requires a minimum of 5 acres for any kind of commercial or mixed use.
That's true
There's
too.
no minimum requirement for single-family plan developments, and so we have seen some very small, it wasn't always that way. It used to be 5 units, or 5 acres for everything, but then we wanted to use it we wanted this tool for a very smaller single-family residential, so the council amended it to say no minimum acreage for single-family development, because that's what they wanted to encourage at the time anyway. So yes, any planned development overlay. But it also requires something better than what just using the regular ordinances,
Yeah.
because it's an extra step. They have to
Yeah.
go through and rezone, whereas, not every developer wants to go through that process. They're just gonna subdivide and develop, or they're gonna do a site plan and do a commercial project. So if you look at our zoning map, it would be /PD, meaning plan development overlay. And I don't know, we probably have less than half a dozen PD, plan development overlays.
And to Lisa's point, I like what you said too, is it invites and it wants a conversation to exist, right? That's the whole reason they exist, so that there can be a dynamic of discussion of what's fair and equitable and beneficial to the city, and what do developers get in trade and flexibility for that benefit. So it is a really good tool if used effectively and correctly, but again, here we are 14 years later, and some of those tools that were established with this one specifically just are not fulfilling what they were intended to do.
And if something like this were to pass, anytime someone did come to amend the PDO or the development agreement, a full legislative process would take place, right? Planning
Yeah.
Commission and City Council.
Public hearing.
For
yep,
any of
the
that
whole
to
land use
happen.
process, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, more questions for the applicant before I go to the public?
No, I have questions for them.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, let's go to the public hearing. We'll open this for a public hearing. We'll receive any comments from the public. If anybody would like to, come forward. Did we receive any online commentary?
No, there was nothing provided that I'm aware of.
given that there's no other member in the audience other than the applicants, I am going to assume that nobody is going to come forward for the public hearing. So we'll close the public hearing. The applicant doesn't need to respond to the public's comments during the public hearing. So let's turn for further follow-up questions to staff.
I have some questions. So when I was reading this earlier, and you know I read everything, doesn't mean I always understand everything, but I read everything, right, on that one. Can you pull up, Jennifer, please, where the staff has their recommendations that he previously, yes, so, the next one.
Do you mean the red line? One more page.
No, no, that's fine.
Is this what you want?
Yeah, so on this, when I read this, your staff suggested modifications. This is everything that we're talking about, right?
So it would be the variation that I proposed. If you look at the documents, the one that says ME edit, that's the one that I'm recommending with Article 2.
And this is the one that would allow them to possibly move forward, right? But this one also protects the city so that we have final say, that it's not a builder having a final say-ish. Am I misunderstanding?
It establishes a path where the base, my intent was it establishes the base. They have to go through the requirements of the plan development overlay zoning standards as constituted, whatever those are, even if we amend them down the road. At least they have to make a good faith effort. We negotiate whatever that is, whether it's through development agreement or the overlay zone terms. Then if down the road it's not working, they bring forward an amended development agreement. We can renegotiate those terms. And then the conflict would presume control if there is a conflict over the standards of the PDO that were previously attempted.
So the only difference between the applicant's proposal and staff's recommendation is that this would only be an option if you have an existing development agreement right now
Yeah.
that's not working. So the staff proposal is you can only use this as an amendment to an existing development agreement.
Yeah, that's a really concise way
So-
to say it.
If somebody else comes and enters into a development agreement with us, you know, I guess they don't get the same
Not unless they bring an amendment down the
bite
road.
at the apple, because then but,
Unless they do what's going on right here.
yeah, unless
Yeah.
it didn't work. But I do think it's a little problematic because we do allow alterations under the code anyway by development agreement. So we're kind of, it's gonna be a tricky line to figure out if it's, you know, an amendment or if they're just asking for something, an alteration. But I think it's a reasonable suggestion to even limit this, because this is, in my opinion, I like to call these like, it's a pioneering idea. It's a new state statute. It's, you know, you can do anything you want by development agreement as long as you adopt it as if you go through the same process as a legislative decision. But, you know, that is a lot of discretion to do something by contract that we were used to doing by zoning or by text amendment. So it's really opening the floodgates, and what staff's recommendation is saying, no, let's just use it for plan development overlays, and let's just use it for existing development agreements that are not working right now. So
That's right.
Narrowing.
now we've narrowed it down to 6 projects. We probably only have 6 projects
Currently.
with development
Yeah.
agreements
Yeah.
in a plan development overlay. Approximately.
Thank you, both of you.
So I'm curious, in the approve with staff, well, I guess both of the approval motions, it says the planning commission finds that the application is consistent with the goals and objectives and policies of the general plan. What I am led to believe is that the city wants more retail and business in that area. Is that incorrect? And if that's the case, how does adding more housing help that, if that's what the city wants?
This is again a philosophical question. If you believe that philosophically more, as was stated, heads and beds will grow retail opportunity and use and commercial value, then it seems to be fulfilling those statements within the general plan.
Yeah.
But if you feel at the same time, conversely, that it doesn't, then it is inconsistent with the general plan. And even a third way to look at it, even if you don't feel like on a recommendation for a motion, that's one of the findings that is supportable, but all the other findings are supportable, then you wouldn't include that finding as one of your findings for your motion, but you could still articulate the other findings. So there's a lot of ways to answer that very comment.
And I think I might even go a step above that, because again, we're not asking or making the decision about changing commercial
That's
to
true.
residential. So
Yeah.
take that off the table. What we're asking is, should we be able to alter any provision of the general plan, any provision?
Okay.
Whether it's, we want commercial here, we want residential, or we want, you know, office warehouse or uses or anything in the general plan, or altering anything in the zoning code, anything in the subdivision, that's the huge leap.
Okay.
Does that?
You could alter anything.
Does that call for unequal play or any, you know, any sort of discriminatory liability that the city could have if we go down that path?
Do you want me to answer first? Because I have an answer to this too.
Okay,
Lisa already
go ahead.
tested me on this.
Okay.
We've already heard there's insurance problems.
She's testing me on
and
this.
damages, right?
So what that would look like, I think we've talked about it, and I've seen this with like Davis County, on more of an economic development perspective with like their redevelopment area or their redevelopment funding. What they'll create is they'll create an administrative sheet of approved or allowed administrative directives of what can be negotiated. So if we created a document that established the types of terms that could be negotiated as part of this, so there was clear directives, so it wasn't, well, I like this developer, but I don't like this developer, so we're gonna give them this break and not them this break, right? There needs to be some generalized directives that anybody in my position, whether it's me or somebody else, can follow. Then that creates that backstop that takes away the inequality. It makes a standard or a guide of what could be applied or utilized for these kind of discussions. So that was a thought I had.
But I think that's a great question and a concern that I have. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been doing land use for over 30 years, and it is hard for me to wrap my head around just having the city enter, you know, going in a back room, negotiating with the developer, well, what do you want? What kind of density? What kind of uses? How tall do you want your buildings? Okay, sounds good, and then we go to a meeting and we approve it. I just, to me, it doesn't have any of the safeguards of going through the process of either subdividing or developing or all these checklists. And so I like what Mike is saying is, well, we're gonna have to create those checklists because this development agreement would have to be entered into at the zoning level. And I really don't understand how we're gonna have all the information to make all the right decisions and understand all the unintended consequences to draft an appropriate development agreement.
And even if you make those checklists, I mean, that's kind of a slippery slope because, in other words, you're allowing private, you know, developers to basically draft our own
Yeah.
code. And as opposed to making individualized checklists with developers, you could just draft a uniform, you know, zoning code that would apply equally
It's fair to
to all
everyone.
applicants.
I agree.
It just depends, yeah, how do you surgically assist one area of the city differently than another area of the city and remove barriers in a way that's fair and equitable for all, right? That's a
Well-
very core issue with the philosophy
Yeah,
discussion.
but we have been doing it a little bit with the plan development overlay, because if you're familiar with it, and maybe we should have given a little primer on it, but basically you come in for a rezone. I want to zone my property to this plan development overlay, and as part of that, you have to bring in a concept plan. So before the council decides whether to rezone something, like going from ag to commercial very high or some stressful rezone, we get to see what the project is going to look like. And that's the trade-off for the city is, oh, okay, if you promise to do this, because there's lots of times when developers come in and say, oh, I want, you know, residential medium, and here's what I'm gonna build, and we always have to remind the council, there's nothing guaranteeing that that's what they have to build. But with a PDO, it is. The pictures they show us is what they have to build unless we amend it along the way. And so we do a bit of that, but within some parameters, you know.
So those are the 6 or so development agreements that the city has outstanding.
Yeah, we probably have, I mean, we may have a dozen PDOs. Not all of our PDOs have a development agreement. Sometimes they were simple enough. All they wanted to alter was a street width. We don't need a development agreement for that, but it was a better design, you know, and, or it was in the hillside, and so we used a PDO to alter something very simple.
And as a tradition, there is evidence showing that there has been a lot of flexibility afforded to how the PDOs have been applied project by project as well, which again, maybe helps us to bring the point forward that we maybe need to be more definitive on what we want the PDO to be and how we want it to be applied moving forward, because it has been used so flexibly in different areas.
So question, and I should have thought of this earlier. If I'm a bad actor, and I want to take advantage of this code, all I have to do is come in, get a PDO and amend it the next day, assuming that I can get some rogue council persons on my side by bribing them.
If you can get 3 council
Now-
members.
Well, we tested Mike on that too. I mean, amendment
She did
just
ask me
means
that.
next week.
Hypothetically speaking, right?
So why are we using amended as the criteria and not timeline or other criteria?
And we could add that, yeah, it could even be after a period of 5 years, you know, adding a term like that to it, were it to be, I think that's a great recommendation.
Well, not.
But my problem is,
Well,
if it's
not
a
recommendation,
legitimate
conversation
issue,
point.
we should be able to, you know, I don't know. I'm struggling with the amendment versus, like I
that's
said, we
fine.
only have 6 development agreements out there, and we only have, let's say, 10 PDOs. But, yeah, I am worried about the fairness issue of the next person that comes through the door, and they can't negotiate the same density that somebody that's been struggling, which I get, but we're gonna make them be stagnant for 5 years? I don't know.
Well,
Couldn't you negotiate at the initial PDO phase and
That's where I was thinking.
point to your neighbor and say, they couldn't make it work, why are you gonna force us?
Yeah.
That's how I
I'm arguing both sides.
See, that's, Chair, that's how I perceived it. That's where I was coming from, is even though we have 6, and it may seem unfair, there is a possibility that there could be more of these that pop up elsewhere that make sense. Like, there's a large 90-acre parcel north of the Public Works building that very well could benefit in the future from the potential use of a PDO. So then the question becomes, does the PDO itself need some rehabilitation to be applied more appropriately in a case like that? And again, down the road, if it is 90 acres and we're 5 or 10 years down, it's not working, right? And then we need to amend it, do we have the tools to do that? Do we want to do that? See, that's where that's where my headspace is
Okay,
going.
so the distinction is, if you're coming in with a new development, you can negotiate whatever you want, just like the people that already have a development agreement, but it's gonna be through the PDO.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
but if you want to use this carte blanche development agreement,
Trump card.
yeah, trump card, you have to have struggled for a while.
And I don't even know if struggle, just show evidence that the plan that was established is not working correctly. Like, it's not working as was previously agreed to or discussed. That there have been societal changes or economic changes that are so significant that the impact is such that there needs to be further discussion.
So maybe you could say,
But then I
But
think,
these
I think
standards
that,
and any
I think that puts
existing
the
development-
planning commission in a kind of an accounting role, and I don't know if that's, you know, really our role is to oversee, you know, whether every sort of situation is going to be economically viable in every, you know, zoning and every building and every project. I think that just goes beyond our scope.
I don't know that it's creating an accountancy, it's creating an evidentiary finding from the applicant group or the group that has the PDO to prove as evidenced, or as they brought forward evidence, some kind of information that shows that it is not working as has been constituted. And again, that's where this becomes such a high-level discussion to try to solve the way forward. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily the way forward, right? But this is a really big, ugly issue, and I suspect there are many communities in the state of Utah in the very same position trying to figure this out.
and I'm not sure we have to have a standard to prove, you know, because applicants can apply for whatever they want.
Right.
But since this is going to now be in our sole discretion, they would just have to show us why you want to amend it on
Yeah.
day 2, and we're going to say, no, you can't amend it on day 2.
Right.
And you can't amend it on day 365, but I don't really want to put that in the code. I mean, I'd rather just say, if you you know, you come in and show, but it's at the
Justify
city's
it.
sole discretion whether we want to amend it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where you
That's a great way to say
are
it.
tying your hands maybe with a development agreement.
Correct,
Yep.
yeah.
I mean, we really would limit this if we just said, yeah, you, of course, I don't love the comp, but anyway, you know, if you have an existing development agreement, then you can use the provisions of 10-9A 532, you know, to alter requirements through the development agreement. But that leaves it the 6 development agreements that we have on the books right now.
Okay, further questions for staff? We're going round the mulberry bush. It's only fair, applicant, would you like to provide any other comment or responses? Okay, answer saying no. We're going to move forward to a motion and debate period. I will open it up for a motion, if anybody would like to start, or any comments, whichever you'd prefer how to proceed. Anybody want to go first? Don't have to start with a motion even, you can just say what you think.
I really liked what Lisa said last. That made the most sense to me. That is not something that is written down. I don't know how to make a motion for that. Are you doing shorthand down there? You're shorthanding what you said?
Well, yeah, I was just saying, yeah, if you have an existing development agreement, then you can use the development agreement trump card. Now, we have to put that into
I like
code, but that's basically,
Verbatim.
and if it's a new development, then you have to negotiate with the city through the PDO rezone
Right.
process.
Right.
Out of everything that I've read, out of everything that's been shared and said and discussed, to me, that makes the most sense to me.
It would be very limiting, yeah. And so if we're opening up the doors, let's just open them a little bit.
That's not
That
flaming
would
wide
be-
open. I think
That would
that's a
be
mistake.
paper thin.
Yeah.
And would that apply to this applicant even, or?
Yes, because they have an existing development agreement. And also sole discretion.
But then that doesn't apply, I mean, there's really no future application of this zoning amendment, even if we were to do just that, right? I mean, it would only apply to the existing 6 development agreements, and then it would be moot, it would, you know, sunset at a certain point, right?
But then wouldn't
Yeah,
everything
now
go back?
unfortunately, they would still have, they'd have to amend their development agreement, but they likely still need to amend their PDO. But anyway, that's an interesting question, depending on how we draft it. But-
Well, now the snake eats its tail. Here are my thoughts. Well, it's just,
Search it.
at that point, if we're amending those, let's just go to the original mechanism. Here are my thoughts. To the extent that we can get out of your way to make this work, we should. To the extent that we're overcomplicating things, we shouldn't. To the extent that we're creating opportunities for bad actors, we shouldn't. And I don't feel comfortable with the language as it stands. I would be inclined to table this so that we could come up with something that's better baked, to make sure that we can get you to the place that you need to be. And if in discussions with staff and under your evaluations, you find that, yeah, we just need to come back to the commission with an application to amend the PDO, you're probably going to find some pretty receptive heads, right? But as written, I'm not inclined to say this is ready.
Right, I agree.
If that's a motion, I'd second that.
Well, I'm
motion.
not there yet, not there yet. I'm just indicating those are my thoughts. But I would say I'm strongly motivated to make sure that this particular applicant can make things work. But I'm also strongly motivated to make sure that applicants that come in can make things work. I'll be frank, and I've been frank all along, I think that Centerville is really restrictive when it really ought not be. We are wedged between the mountains and the lake. We don't have a whole lot to go on. And if we're going to be adding people here along the Wasatch Front, we've got to figure out a way to do it. And single-family residential isn't going to work on a half an acre. We don't have it anymore. So we need to make sure that projects can come in. And if we've done things to our applicants, not just these, but over the past 14 years, and you can't find economically viable people that are willing to do what we need to do on however many acres we had, units per acre, then we made the wrong choice. We put handcuffs on things that we shouldn't have. If that makes any sense, right? And so if we're trying to unhandcuff something that we 14 years ago were not forethoughtful enough to fix, maybe this is the right fix, but I don't see it here today. Those are my thoughts.
I don't know that we made wrong decisions. I think they were probably appropriate for the time and the size. Speculation.
Sure.
But I would agree with you that we're not where we need to be.
I am motivated to think that maybe the idea that this can act as an escape hatch for development agreements, so long as the development agreements go through the right process in the first instance.
Well, and it's just like the appellate process. I mean, there's reasons, I think, maybe why you've embedded certain requirements at each, corner of the code, so that the public or the commission doesn't miss those certain steps. And I think if we jump too quickly to this route, I think we're going to miss some of those steps.
I was gonna basically say the same thing you said, like, that to me, it seems like that it should be tabled and ask staff to basically take what we've discussed here and do it. That was gonna be
That's kind of my thought. I think there's been some good thoughts presented, and I think the staff can take those, and as you say, we can rebake the motion and come back another time.
Okay, I'll go ahead and make a motion then, if that's okay. Get the language.
part of the bottom.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to table this request from Mitch Vance, representing JF Legacy Partners LLC, for a zoning code text amendment regarding CCZ 12.41.060B, and then the possible proposed new 7 uses allowed in commercial plan developments, until such a time as a redrafted form could come in front of the commission that addresses the commission's concerns noticed today, including the potential uses by bad actors, the potential that the language could include trigger conditions, such as that this section only apply to amendments that have been adopted and gone through the original PDO process, and have all of the protections of the public process already in place, such that this language would act as an escape hatch at a future point on that development agreement. That's my motion. That was a lot.
I second the motion.
Okay, I've got a first and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll start with a vote down here.
Just a question on that. So is this motion asking staff to come back
Oh.
with a redraft of this text, amendment?
No, my motion was agnostic as to that, so that staff and/or the applicant, frankly, it's the applicant's burden here to come up with something that makes sense, right?
I just wanted to make it clear that the staff, didn't have to.
No,
Come back.
no, we're not asking staff to do this. This isn't something that we asked you to do. This is something that the applicant came in and asked us to do. Therefore, as I see it, my motion is to get the applicant to work as necessary with the staff to make something that makes sense.
Considering all of our comments, whether they want to come back or not, or just go down the POD amendment process or PDO amendment process.
That is a better clarification of my motion. Yes, that's what I intended.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
Starting on the vote.
Yay. Yes, whatever we say.
Aye.
Aye.
Louder.
Aye.
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 Very good. Okay, passes unanimously to table. Thank you both for coming in. I hope you understand our hesitations, but we are excited to see, hopefully, some way to skin the cat that we can get you where you need to go.
How many knives did you say we needed?
Yeah, great question.
3 to 2.
3 knives.
Four
ways.
Cats only have 9 lives, so be careful with the knives.
Moving on to item number 2, public hearing zoning code amendment proposal, signs in Parish Lane Gateway Commercial. Mr. Agate, I assume you're leading out? All right, fire away.
Okay, so on this one, it's unique. We are the petitioner of the Community Development Department on this one. We are desiring to alter sections of the side ordinance, as you noted, in CZC 12.54.120 and 12.54.130. As you can see from the background on this, we're seeking this amendment to amend standards for freestanding sign heights along Frontage Road to 400 West, amend standards for freestanding sign in a planned center within the Frontage Road to 400 West area of the sign code, and amend standards in CZC 12.54.130 to clarify how freestanding planned center signs are allowed to be matching standards as CZC 12.54.130. So the effort here is to provide more flexibility, visibility, and opportunity for businesses facing I-15 as located along the south end of Frontage Road, and the south end being from Parish Lane down to the city boundary with Bountiful City near Pages Lane. We do note, as there at the last sentence, that there are significant future cleanup needs within the side ordinance. 12.54 is legal and staff have looked at it. So at a later date, there'll be more comprehensive sign code amendments forthcoming. But specifically, we're focusing on these in order to provide more economic and commercial development opportunities with new tools for properties along that frontage road area. So the four factors, again, we talked about it. The only one that really seems to be relevant to what's going on here is whether or not the proposed zoning code or zoning map amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the general plan. And there's only a few sections that talk specifically about this district. Again, that district that is bounded by Frontage Road and 400 on the south side of Parish Lane. They're referenced in the neighborhood 2 district. And the guidance there states that where allowed, freestanding signs should be limited in size, well-designed, and become gradually smaller in height and size the further away the sign is located from Interstate 15. The statement is alignment with the zoning text amendment request that has been presented in the packet, as the proposed height amendment would only be allowed along Frontage Road as facing Interstate 15. And then there's no further direction specifically about the south end of Frontage Road within the Centerville general plan. I did add a similar note that we're in the process of an update to the general plan. So again, remember some of the conversations of the last item relative to that as part of this analysis. The special overlay districts, specifically the Parish Lane commercial area, plan development overlay areas and other similarly agreed to directives or codified directives that further impact sign standards would still be applicable. And then the summation is that I'm just going to read it because, again, I think it captures it really well. The zoning text amendment proposal to these specific sections of the sign ordinance is a benefit to the commercial district located along the south end of Frontage Road and therefore would be of benefit to the retail commercial development interests of the city. The impact to other properties is of none to little impact to neighboring property owners with greater benefit to this commercial area and the Centerville commercial community. Should this amendment be approved, Centerville businesses located along the south end of Frontage Road should have additional promotional flexibility through the use of these updated signage tools available to them. Again, this evaluation has led to an awareness that further work will need to be completed for the sign code 12.54 as a whole. And so you'll see the possible motions are in there for approve with the findings, table and deny with the findings. Documentation that has been provided in your packet reflect the final draft language. The amendment, there's no amendments really until you get near the bottom of it, but they start on page 3 of that document. And then you'll see pretty significantly in Article B, Frontage Road to 400 West, that whole section. And then you'll see a small amendment in 12.54.130A3. It's trying to establish consistency with statements made in 12.54.120. That is what that amendment is reflecting. And then the last document is representing that the public hearing was done in accordance with the requirement for a zone text amendment. And I guess if you have questions about specifically any of the proposed amendments, I do have a commentary and guidance for that, but I guess at this point I would defer to you, Chair Kerr, to decide how you want to proceed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Questions for staff?
Yes. So in here, you talk about providing more economic tools and that it's a benefit for developer or development interests. How so?
Because right now, the signage height is only 25 feet, so it's really low. And so there's a perspective by businesses along Frontage Road, that section in particular, that feel like they're impacted, that they have some signage that isn't readily visible from a pole signage perspective. And it honestly, in working in other cities, I would tend to agree. The last city I worked in, we had pole signage allocations along the freeway up to 60 feet with a conditional use approval. And I'm not saying that that's what we need to do here. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But when you have a business that wants to be visible along the freeway, they do like to be elevated because it's easier, obviously, for the public to see them. And so for that purpose, I noted that. The other thing that was somewhat limiting, the maximum total area of 100 square feet is fairly small, so there's addition up to 150 square feet. And I will also note that there are businesses that have requested these kind of amendments to be added to the sign code. So if you're curious about motivations, that's where the motivation is coming for these amendments.
Makes sense. So in my mind, I'm super visual. I don't know what 100 square feet looks like as opposed to 150 square feet. We're not talking like a Yesco or a Reagan sign at all in our area.
No.
but how would you
That's probably
compare it to
100.
that?
10 by 10 is 100 square feet.
So is that like a,
That panel is probably what, 8 by
10 by
15?
4.
Yeah.
so about that size is
I mean,
what we're
that's-
gonna allow-ish?
I'm gonna,
Twice that
as
size.
Oh, twice that
professional
size?
lawyer, I'm gonna say that that's about 100 square feet.
There you go.
Look
So
at you,
that
mathematician.
plus half of that then on top of it.
Big sign.
Yeah.
You think what?
It would be a big sign. I mean, I think-
That?
And again, you have to think of it from a human scale as well in relationship to the size of the building, in relationship to the size of the site plan. Everything looks smaller by distance in
Sure.
relationship to
Right.
the scale of the location, right?
Right.
So a 10 by 10 sign next to a small cottage is gonna look a lot bigger than a 10 by 10 size by a gigantic
Right.
building.
So that makes sense to me for owners wanting a bigger sign. But and we're supposed to be looking out for, the people that
Yeah.
work here, live here, all of that. Does this have any benefit to the citizens?
It would if it makes a location more visible and promotes more trips to that location due to visibility. If they're more easily identified. In theory, I mean, the philosophy would be if I can more readily recognize a business than I could before, something that business is selling, it's going to be more motivational to get people to peel off the freeway to go to that business. And so they have an opportunity, freeway facing, that other businesses may not have. But if they can't maximize that opportunity, it's kind of the same discussion we had before. Are we therefore creating barriers and handicapping the opportunities that we actually want them to be successful having, but we're not letting them have the tools to be that successful?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure
Yeah.
out all of the
And in this
whys.
case, all the properties along that section are business-related properties currently.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
Has there been any safety study done? If increasing signage will cause a detriment on the roads?
To your point, again, I'm going off of experience here. UDOT does have standards for signage located along their roads. They have certain highs and certain size restrictions. These are nowhere near those restrictions, just know that. Even to the point where like your digital billboards have to cycle at a rate, I think they have to stay static for 8 or even 12 seconds before they can cycle. So to your question, yes, UDOT has those standards, and those standards do have to be met by freeway-facing signs. And in this case, this would be of minimal impact within those standards.
And so the same thing would apply then for quantity of signs, right? Not just,
We would control the quantity, but again, as you see, that there's really significant limitations. They can only have one freestanding sign unless they have 2 frontages and are in a planned center development area that the city has accepted.
yeah, I read that. I was just
Yeah,
kind of confused.
that's
It's
how we
like-
control sign clutter, to your comment, though.
That's a
that-
great
that
term,
statement
yeah,
right there.
sign clutter.
Yeah,
Because that's super distracting too,
Yeah.
and sloppy.
yeah, correct. Yeah.
I think of like
Yes,
taller,
I
bigger
guess.
signs being in areas that are much more industrial. There are houses directly behind these buildings. Like the last thing I want to do is I don't know, I think Mason, don't you live over there? Mason
Ish.
goes and sits
Yeah.
on his back patio, and now
About
all
4
of a
blocks
sudden, there's a
away.
huge sign in front of him that he can't see this beautiful sunset or whatever. That's, you know, I don't know. just-
In-N-Out hamburgers.
Right.
Are
So-
we controlling like the LED or not LED or just?
Just the size.
Just
and
the
lo- and-
size.
And, yeah, the elevation and the sizing is what we're talking about
How
here.
high?
On the other- 45 feet.
Or 25 to
Remember, a
45?
lot of your buildings along frontage road are at 45 feet or taller currently as well. So do you remember that key point?
How tall is Young Power Sports right now?
They're-
That's their tallest
I
one, right?
want to say, well, their tower is like 80 feet
Oh, really? Okay.
itself.
So how did they get that big of a sign?
I don't know how to answer this question.
That was BM before
Christmas.
Mike.
Dinner at their place.
It's not a sign, it's a structure.
Yeah.
Okay.
They put the
Structure is
sign
part
on
of
the
their site.
structure.
It's how you define it, right?
Yeah.
But
that
the
actually makes
facade is pretty high as well.
Yeah, it's like 40 feet. I want to say 35, 40 feet itself.
So
Maybe
the
even taller.
Signs would be about.
I've seen the building, I've looked at the site plan, you're saying, you think I'd have it memorized, how many times I've seen it, but I don't remember the exact number. But it's in that area.
No, that's good to know.
And that's the point I'm
So
trying.
like, how many more signs are we anticipating by this change?
It's really not creating a new amount of signage. It's, the discussion is height and sizing on this one.
So it will look different.
Potentially,
it'll
if,
change it,
again,
yeah.
if a business takes advantage of the changes in the code.
Basically, it just changes from sort of Parish Lane to the
Right.
south city boundary
Almost two
along frontage
pages.
road. So all of those businesses could go
20 feet,
25
right.
feet to 45.
And maybe have a little bit
And
bigger.
if any of them
square
are
feet.
planned centers, I don't know if they are, and they have 2 frontages, then you would see additional signage.
So it could be cluttered.
Well, it would go from one pole
Maybe
sign
two.
opportunity to maybe 2 if they have a corner, if they have 2 frontages, which again is very limiting because not everybody does.
Right, okay.
Okay.
All right, those are my questions. Thank
Further
you.
questions?
Which were some of the applicants that kind of showed an interest to do this?
There's been,
Or not necessarily applicants, but.
the interest has come specifically from Young Power Sports on this matter. But it could obviously have a broad application to some of the other businesses that could benefit from it, yeah.
Do they have 2 facing?
They,
things, or-
they have a small pole sign with Honda Motorsports on it, and then they have a form of signage on their current water tower.
Right, sorry, let me reword my question.
Okay?
Because you were talking about if they have 2 sides of the road, or they have
2 frontages.
2
Uh-huh.
frontages. They only have 1
They have
frontage.
2, they have Porter and they have frontage
Oh,
road.
they have 2, so they could do 2 big signs.
And they are a planned center in that they have multiple brands that they sell. They're like a mall for the type of use they have.
And what does that mean, that they're a
They
planned
would be
center?
entitled to the 2 freestanding signs because they meet both criteria to qualify for
Got
it.
it, okay.
Do we know what
Thank you.
Bountiful and Farmington do? Just, I mean, I would hate to see like, Centerville signs, ooh, and then Bountiful, Farmington, or.
I didn't do an exploration of it, but like I said, 25 feet along a freeway is very surprising. Again, having worked in other cities and seen other cities' codes, typically you see heights of 40 to 45 feet is a traditional standard. And I would suspect if you looked at most communities and signage along the freeway, they would be at 40 or 45 feet.
I feel like the ones along the, when you get off the freeway into Bountiful where the 3 gas stations are, I feel like those are 45 feet.
At least.
Some might
That
even be
area, and they're not
taller,
even on the
right?
freeway, yeah, they may
Yeah.
even be taller.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it sounds tall, but in sense of comparative scale, when you see it, and you're on the freeway and you're driving as fast as you are, you kind of need to put it in the relative perspective of what it is.
And again, one more time for clarification for my brain.
Sure.
You just want to say, you're just amending this to say they can be this high, this
A
big.
little bigger.
But then no control whether they're LED flashing.
That's not part of it.
That's
That,
not-
but we do have to do a comprehensive sign update, because both Lisa and I agree there's a lot of confusion and challenges within that code. So that is something that would come forward at a later date, for certain.
Right, we're not deciding that right now,
Right.
but I was just clarifying.
Correct. But it's certainly something that could be addressed or discussed at a later date, even if we brought something forward and the planning commission felt like there were other things that needed to be looked at as part of that.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Okay, further questions for staff?
I don't know if now's the time to bring up, but I was wondering, I had made a suggestion to possibly take out in section 120B, there's a provision there that says the planning commission may grant a
Oh, yeah.
conditional use
Sorry,
permit
Lisa.
for a freestanding sign over 250 feet, but not exceeding 500 square feet. I just don't know if the planning commission should be granting conditional use permits for sign size. Like, what's the objective criteria? I mean, like we were saying before, I think we should have a standard, or we shouldn't, because then everybody's gonna be asking for
I
this.
agree.
Yeah, and there's no
I
directive.
didn't even know that was in there.
Yeah. This is, again,
That's
Or I don't know if it was for across the street.
That basically
but-
just creates an exception to.
Yeah, to get
It
a
gives you
500 square foot sign.
full discretion, do what you want.
no.
And remember, conditional use permits, we can only deny if we can, if there's negative impacts that
Yeah.
we can't mitigate.
Articulate the negative impact to some property. or-
So you're suggesting to take that out?
Yeah, maybe add
Maybe as
that
part
as
of a
a
motion
planning
where you did
commission
make a decision.
recommendation, that you don't want that burden.
Do we need to amend table of uses, or is that some just freestanding provision?
Table of uses, do we have a table, you mean, do we have a table of uses for signs?
Yeah. Is there any other position or place in the code that this would apply?
That's a good question.
Because I'm all for taking that out.
I am as well.
Yeah.
Oh, just on the sign height, yeah,
The conditional use thing.
you can check.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's just proceed. I'm sure that if you find something, you can bring it back to us.
And again, we certainly plan to bring the sign code either in sections or maybe as a whole if we dare bite off that much at a later date, because it needs some work.
A little antiquated.
All right. I assume that we have no applicant, given that this is city-driven, correct?
Correct.
And so we will proceed to the public hearing. I'll open it up for a public hearing. I'll wait the mandatory 7 seconds. Nobody appearing, I will close the public hearing. And further questions? Okay, then I will proceed to the motion and debate phase. I'll lead out on this one. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's targeted, it's very hyper-specific, especially given the geographical limits on the frontage road there. I'm not so keen on the 150. I'm just not. I just did the math real quick. 10 by 10 is 100, 12.25 by 12.25 is 150. We live in a place where our skyline is kind of one of the features of the state. Whether you're looking from the freeway to the mountains or from your houses to the sunset, maybe the 2.25 foot doesn't make a big difference, frankly. And I don't know. I could be persuaded either way, let's say it that way.
Do I have permission to speak?
Of course.
There is a property owner that already has a sign that is near 150 square feet along frontage road
How
currently.
did they get that?
That is a good question. Just so the planning commission is aware in full disclosure, it is already almost near 150 square feet.
Can we know
It's
which
currently
one that is
constituted.
so that I can try and picture it in my head?
It's a Young Power Sports sign.
Okay.
I mean, but the same thing can be said of the raising of the, additional 20 feet. If you're going to
Oh, I totally agree,
You know.
right? I totally agree. That's why I could be persuaded either way. Does 2.25 foot on each side really make that big of a difference?
I think the height makes more of a difference.
Especially where it's set down
Uh-huh.
from the freeway.
Okay. Thoughts before we proceed with the motion?
Do we have to accept 45 feet?
No?
Is that just your proposal?
There's been, again, requested interest in 45 feet being an allowance, and it is a typical standard in many cities that at least I've had experience working with. So again, you have the discretion as a planning commission to make a decision based on that information, but that is the factual information.
More debate, or shall we proceed to motions?
I'm just thinking, me personally, I would like to have like more of a study to say, okay, this is what we currently have, this is what it would be adjusted to, more of a, like, have pictures and maybe that's just like, idealistic.
But I like it.
And way too much work. on one hand, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but on the other, it's like, okay, you know, like Mike's saying, I mean, it's not that big of a difference.
Remember, the water tower is like 80 feet tall.
How much is
Yes,
the
but that's
megaplex?
nicely set back as well.
Yeah, and,
Taller
and,
than
and it might be
But-
nice to see some of the UDOT's recommendations and what Bountiful and Farmington are doing.
Like Farmington case.
And then, you know, and is this an issue that needs to be resolved right away? Or, you know, is it hindering, like, is this hindering, you know, your footsteps to the door like you were commenting earlier? Is this, you know?
There is definite interest in this amendment. In fact, if you look at minutes from previous conversations about signage going back to 8 months ago to 10 months ago, these conversations were had in front of, I don't know if it was planning commission or city council or internally with staff, but there's recorded information that reflects that this discussion was intended to happen or expected to happen at some point, maybe even sooner.
Yeah, and maybe if we're already engaging in a, you know, kind of sign rewrite of the whole, you know, maybe we want to take a holistic approach at that point.
You certainly could, and Lisa and I actually talked about that, like, with some of the concerns and challenges that staff in the city is facing relative to these kind of issues right now, the planning commission could move forward with these issues, knowing that from a broader perspective, there's much more conversation to be had about the sign code in its entirety at a future date.
Because in addition to these sort of changes, what other changes are you anticipating that may come up with
There's just-
respect to signs?
I know, and maybe I'll let Lisa say her 10 cents or whatever she wants to say about it, but there's a lot of conflicting statements within the code itself, and it's confusing even for staff to know exactly how to apply it. And I think over the years, staff's done the best they could, but they've also kind of, I'm not trying to say this negatively about staff, that's not my intent, but kind of feels like there's been horse trading sometimes with signage because it's been somewhat unclear about how to apply it. So there would need to be, I think, better clarification, understanding of how it should be applied. I don't know, does that sound fair, Lisa?
Yeah, I could not understand. I told Mike I'd have to go back to school and get a PhD in sign code because I could not understand this section of the code. And I guess we just, you know, sign permits are just handled at a staff level, and I really hadn't dealt with this section of the code very often, and it was hard for me to, you know, Mike was saying, what does this mean? I don't, so I did have to do some modeling. I've got some, you know, because our sign code actually does anticipate a tiering. So since I-15 comes up to get off of Parish Lane, those signs right along I-15, you know, and frontage, those get 60 feet because you're coming up and they want to be able to see them. But as soon as you come down off the exit, then the next tier is you get 45 or 50 feet, sorry, right in there, still on frontage road. But then the further you go, then, you know, around Marketplace, you get 45, and then you get 25, and then clear out by Main Street, you know, you're down to 20. And so that is like a tiered approach from the intersection heading east on Parish Lane. But the only, and then you allow these freeway-oriented, the 60 feet, 600 feet
Only
from,
very few
from Parish
businesses
Lane.
get that
So it doesn't
benefit.
cover very many. Yeah, like on one side,
It's
it was
very
just like
limiting,
5.
kind of unfair.
But that's because the road's so high.
Right,
yeah.
But the only area that it does go all the way to our southern boundary is this one area that says, oh, you can have, you know, freeway-oriented up to a certain height, but it's the 25 feet in this area. And so, again, just kind of taking it down, but the policy question is that still relevant? Do we need the tiering down from Parish, or should we tier down from I-15?
Almost like it's three-dimensional, right? It's not just so flat, it's this too, going eastward. And is it fair to the businesses that are on Freeway Park Drive that are working just as hard to benefit themselves and the city to be restricted to where we allow 45 and 60 to be for people who are geographically advantaged and also impacted, in fairness to the question, by their location? And so that's I think where some of the appeal is. I mean, one of my key tasks being brought to the city was to help with the economic development aspects of my job, more so than maybe historically had happened. And so you could see that both in the last item and this item, that I'm bringing more of that slant forward, and I will continue to do so because my challenge is to try to protect both the community development aspects as well as the economic development perspectives and benefits to the residents and the taxpayers of the city.
Yeah, I love the idea of bringing forward these sort of, recommendations, because then we get this dialogue going, so I think kudos to the staff to at least put this on the table.
Yeah.
Because even if we don't agree with, it yet, or we don't have enough evidence or whatever, tonight, maybe we can come back and say, let's look at it holistically, and then maybe we will adopt it,
Well, and what we didn't want to do was go blanket with 45 and then have your Home Depot be, to your point
That's right,
earlier.
yeah.
To your point earlier, now it's real close to a residential district and have a 45-foot tall sign along 400 there near a residential district. So what I'm trying to say with that statement is we're very conscientious of trying to create that balance between the neighborhood element and the commercial elements of what we're talking about.
Last question. The 150 square feet is on Parish. Do they have 100 square feet or 150? Or is it also
There.
tiered?
Good
Mine.
question.
Modeling, okay, so on I-15, the 60-foot signs can have up to 200 square feet. The 50-foot signs along frontage within 600 feet of Parish Lane can have 50 feet and 165 square feet. And then the next tier is along, I don't know if that's Marketplace Drive. They get 45 feet and 100 square feet. And then everywhere else can have 25 feet and 100 square feet.
Thank you.
That's why Young Power Sports is they're out because they're out of that zone.
Well, I don't know how they got that allocation, but again, I do remember this a little bit more, looking at the sliding scale where you get down to 20, it's weird that you have 45 feet locked in at 100 and 25 at 100, but then at 50 you get 165. It's almost like 45 should be something else, not 100,
Yeah.
but it was never ever clarified what that should be given the scalar nature of the other signage.
All right, moving back to the commission for a motion and vote. Anybody want to lead out with a motion?
I don't love anything. I love a lot of things. I don't love anything right here. Can you go up a little bit, please, Jennifer? Oh, sorry, the other way.
Oh, down.
Down. Mhm. I really feel like Tyler said something good about, wanting more information, and I know that we have been compared to Bountiful, we've been compared to Bountiful a lot, but we're not. We're Centerville, and we're, 2 miles by 3 miles or whatever. And it's lovely to be able to see what we can see, the sceneries we're driving by, and we're distinctly not Bountiful with all of the signs. I don't know, I don't want to make a motion, but I just agree with what he said, that I would like further information. And that I'm just internally, I'm not comfortable with approving it as written or as accepting it.
Okay, so is that a motion or is that just your thoughts?
Girl. That's what I'm saying.
I heard that Z-snap.
You know it.
That was impressive.
You know it.
I'm impressed if you know the Z-snap. That was pretty good.
I don't want to step out of turn, right? But that's how I'm feeling about that.
Fair enough.
If we make a motion, we talk about it, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm understanding.
Yep. I'm inclined to allow it. I think that it's targeted, it's very specific, and it gets us across at least one portion of the roadway. It gets us a little bit further down the road. Some of the times that we, just humans, we dither sometimes, and we hope for a massive change when an incremental change might be helpful. Fair point, maybe looking at it holistically would be better. I would say that this is targeted enough that it doesn't create unintended consequences that I'm not unwilling to live with as a citizen. I'm still not all that keen on 150. I would be more like 121 or 120. Just throwing out 11 by 11s or 10 by 10s.
And if for some reason we do adopt this tonight, and you want to come back and say, okay, we'll go back to the 125, we just can't live with the 150, we can always do that, right?
Can
Somebody
we?
might have the 150 up already, though.
Well,
Well,
they already do.
that's why I brought forward,
It's
there's an
grandfathered.
existing sign.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to change that by,
yeah.
We can't go back.
But
yeah.
if they, I'm not sure if they requested a height elevation, if I could give them that height elevation with their sign not being conforming, if that allowance wasn't provided. Let's put it in those terms.
Is there any way for us to, I mean, like Mason was saying, to say we're more comfortable with 100 than 150? Is this what you are suggesting, or is this
What
what it is?
I'm saying is, if I can't live within the confine, if I can't provide a sign movement or sign establishment within the confines of the code, then they won't be allowed to make that movement, and they just keep things as is if they want to do anything with the existing circumstance. Like I won't be able, I have to follow the directives of the code as approved, right? So they will have to either reduce their signage to elevate it or keep it as is, and as almost like a
Which is the sign?
grandfathering or pre-existing.
So we've got the billboard.
The,
I'm just looking at Google Earth.
on the water tower. Oh, yeah, you don't have it in that Google Earth image.
It's
pretty new.
The sign?
Yeah, I mean,
Man,
I wanna see
I'm
it.
kind of along the same lines as you, but I
Yeah,
just
you
think
put
it's
something up
asinine
on
that
there?
they have this
Well,
5 more feet than Main Street in Centerville. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, why don't I lead out with a motion? I'm persuaded that the 150 can make sense. I'm going to go ahead and say, this is my motion, to approve as written in the staff report under number 1 for the reasons listed therein.
Oh, that's all I had to say. I thought I had to read the whole thing. I was nervous.
oh, because they've got it on three.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Now is the time for discussion or proposals to amend.
Sorry, I was looking at this. Did that include deleting the planning commission?
Thank you. I will move to amend my own motion such that it deletes the following language from 12.54.120 sub B, sub 1, sub B, sub 3, sub cap A, the following language. Last sentence, the planning commission may grant a conditional use permit for a freestanding sign over 250 square feet, but not exceeding 300 square feet in accordance with provisions of CCZ 1221-100, that language be deleted.
You said 300, isn't it 500? Am I reading it wrong? I'm sorry.
500,
It is.
whatever. Delete the last sentence.
Delete it.
Does the second approve of that amendment?
Approve.
Okay, so we have a motion and second on the approved motion as written in the staff report with that verbal audible. Discussion.
Does anybody feel like they need, additional evidence or findings from the staff to
I would
move
love
forward?
more. I would love more. I don't want a city skyline. I don't want Vegas
Okay.
in Centerville.
So do you want to make an amendment? I mean, I guess we could make an amendment to the amendment that this could prove as long as staff can come back with maybe UDOT sign data, what Bountiful and Farmington are doing, and then maybe, kind of that 3D like you mentioned, Mike, just so we get a visual of, hey, this is the increase. I don't know if that's even feasible.
I
but-
was gonna say, I'm not sure how to apply the
Well, you
manpower and
could-
ever to.
So here's
You
what
can
I'm,
give some
hold on.
pictures.
Hold on.
I can do
Here's what,
Yeah,
we have a
maybe just
motion, hold on.
pictures.
We have a motion on the table, we have a motion on the table. We need to make a decision about it. I'm not going to amend the motion for a table. It's just as an approve. We should deny the motion if the three of you do not want to proceed with the motion as approved. Then we can go with a motion for a table.
I think,
Mine would be kind of a hybrid, like, I'm okay to do this as long as it's supported.
Yeah, at that point, you might as well just table.
In essence, it would be.
Yeah.
I'm just floating the idea, like, are we comfortable with it? Because I'm hearing a lot of consternation. So if we want to, now's our time to just say, hey, let's get some more proof that this is what we want to do.
Right.
And I don't think us approving this means that staff can't do that in the future. So, I mean, that's where I feel more comfortable with it. We can set these limitations in the future. I think that right now, there is a business that is a new business, and we want them to thrive, we want them to succeed, and giving them the ability to put this signage up that would help them is important. And then coming back and amending that stuff later can still take place.
Yeah, technically, we could, next time we meet, pull it back down to 100.
Yeah.
We could. Have a running
So-
amendment.
Do you want to add some comments before I call a vote?
I don't know, some of my comments are similar to what she was saying in regards to, I have a brother that lives in Washington, and he prides himself in the fact that just out by just north of the Portland, Oregon area, like, their signs are very small. Their trees are what dominates the skyline. I have a cousin that lives in Vegas. It's quite the opposite, and they literally love their signs, and the sphere that is like illuminating, like, you can't even see the stars at night in Las Vegas. And so I see both sides to it, but I think some more clarity on maybe the signage would be better.
Okay, so calling for a vote, starting on this end. This is to approve.
Yeah, I'm gonna say no at this point, but I'm totally
Well,
open to
hold on,
be
it's aye or nay, so nay.
Nay.
Aye?
Nay.
Okay, motion does not pass. It's now open for additional motions. This is your turn.
Okay, I'll just make the motion to table it pursuant to the recommendation, I think number 2 it was, until such time as the staff can come back with the UDOT sign data as to what they would recommend on that area of the road. I would like to see what Bountiful and Farmington are doing, just so we can kind of, keep that consistent there. And then, like we mentioned, maybe just get some photos of, coming east, what we're doing, and then along I-15, what, photos of the lay of the land right there with respect to signs, just so we can be a little bit better informed.
Okay, so there we have a motion. Any second?
I will second that, but are we going to add the removal of 3A?
And the removal of 3A,
Okay, with a proposal to remove 3A.
which was Lisa's recommendation, right? Okay.
Yeah, not removing it today because we're not
Right.
making that.
Right.
Get into the-
Yep, but that would be the future amendment.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Starting here.
Aye.
Nay?
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. We'll see it next time. Moving
It'd
on.
be helpful to have some pictures of, look, here's the existing signs and their height and size, because they may not be up to the maximum, but,
Yeah.
and then here's, kind of
Yep.
some modeling maybe that would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to figure out how to do that. I don't know how to figure that out. We'll have to get creative. Not even sure how to approach it, but we'll figure something out. Hopefully it'll satisfy what the planning commission wants. We'll do
Okay,
that.
Mr. Eggett.
And even if you, well, even if like we don't get the photos, because I know that could be kind of hard just with visuals or whatever, but maybe with just some additional information.
Yeah, we'll
you
figure
know.
something out.
Yeah.
We'll at least bring more information forward. I just hope it meets the intent of the.
Yeah, yep.
And last thing, if you don't have it ready by next time, please bring back the motion or the proposal to delete 3A
Yeah.
under any circumstance.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Even if it has to be a standalone. Let's let
Did,
that
did,
out.
did we want to add that, say, hey, a certain date? Do we need to add that, or
No.
Yeah, there,
it's open-ended?
I believe that there's a chance it could be back at the next planning commission meeting or the.
Okay.
All I'm asking is that if staff would bring back the deletion under any circumstance next time,
Yeah. Okay.
please and thank you. All right,
Thank you.
Mr. Eggett, you have the floor.
Just speaking of the next planning commission meeting, I believe we will have another action item on that planning commission meeting. There is a site plan request that's looking like it will be ready to go for planning commission at the next meeting. So anticipate that. So I'm letting you know now so that you can know to make sure your calendars are available to be here.
I will be gone.
Say that, what was the dates again? Sorry.
It's August 28th, I believe, is the date.
I will be out of state.
Should be good.
Will you guys be here? Tyler?
Yeah, I should be here.
So it'll be good. I mean, it'll be the first site plan in a little while, a new site plan, so, yeah, bring it forward at that point.
Okay.
Other than that, we are still, like I noted earlier in the other discussion, working on general plan. By the time we have our next meeting, we'll be able to have a legitimate update for you, because we'll have had that conversation with our consultant. And I will say that even though July was very slow, August has proven to be extremely busy. That's why probably on the last item, my eyes went like this, because I feel already way underwater with everything else I'm dealing with. So that being said, we will still fulfill it, but just know that there is a lot trying to happen in Centerville at the moment. And so I just want you to be aware of that, both building permitting, business licensing, and new subdivision and/or site plan type requests are coming forward. So, and with that, I think that's how brief I'll keep the report today.
Excellent, thank you. On to item 2.
Yes, so this one's exciting. So I know Sydney's been waiting all night to be able to share. Sydney DeWeese, we've hired Sydney DeWeese, and she joined our team it was the first Monday of August. So she's been with us almost 2 full weeks now. She's awesome.
And you're still here.
She comes to us from the city of Sunnyside, Washington, as far as her last job, but she is a native of the beautiful state of Illinois, from a city called Macomb, right?
Macomb, yeah.
Macomb?
Yeah.
And so I think at that, I've said enough, she's awesome. I said that once, but I'll say it again, and I'll defer to Sydney to say whatever she would like to say and introduce herself to you all.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for welcoming me and letting me sit in on this. I will not make it too long. Basically, I'll just give you my elevator pitch. I graduated from Macomb, Illinois with my master's degree in community and economic development in the year of 2023. And I was a city planner for the city of Sunnyside for a year. Ended up making my way out to Utah. I love the outdoors, and my specialty is in rural development. So however you see fit, that would fit here for the city of Centerville. I also love the opportunity to go towards more urban development and get that underneath my belt. So my door is always open. That is kind of like a blanket statement. So if you guys ever want to chat with me about what kind of development is going on, where our directives are going, I feel comfortable with just saying that you guys have the opportunity to come and chat with me about it. That is something that I kind of feel at a personal level. So this is a dialogue. This is something that it's not staff and then the planning commission. Definitely an involved effort to support the citizens of Centerville.
Thank you. Welcome.
So are you going to live in the city, or are you going to live somewhere else?
I actually tried to get an apartment in Centerville and could not get an apartment in Centerville. So I live in a basement apartment in Kaysville.
Because there's pros and cons of living in the city that you plan for.
Yes, there is. Yes, but pretty close, pretty close.
And we have the housing incentive program in place, don't we? Didn't we adopt that a year or 2 ago?
It's part of a moderate income housing plan, but the policy is not in place.
It was a goal.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right, it was a goal.
yeah.
We're
And
still paddling on
I
it.
actually have a report on that very policy just right before August 1st, so we're
Awesome.
working on it.
Okay, all right. Moving on, I assume that's it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Minutes of prior meeting. The minutes are in the packet. Do we have any edits, proposed changes? Anybody notice any nits? Okay, I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, motion to approve the minutes as written. Any second?
I will second.
Okay, we've got a second. Voting from down here?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes unanimously. Finally, the training module. Lisa?
It's actually
Oh,
me.
Mr. Eggett.
But given that we had such hearty discussions on the first two items, I don't know if we want to move forward with this or if I can save it for the next meeting and then can do it on the 28th.
What do you recommend, sir?
It's a lot of information and I was going to get into it probably, I bet you I would take 20 minutes to even a half hour. So I would say maybe we just continue this for our next meeting on the 28th.
Well, I can tell you, I've got another 4 hours of work in me, so I would rather be done here so I can get back to drafting a brief.
Like a
Yeah.
table.
So I'm comfortable, I guess. If you'll read it though, that'll obviously help. But I think it's very relevant where we are doing all I'll do to pitch it is it's very relevant in light of us doing a general plan. So that's why I wanted to have that discussion.
Okay, let's move that forward to another agenda. So I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion on the end, any second?
Second.
Seconded. We'll all vote together. Aye?
Aye.
It's unanimous. We are done. Thank you, everybody.
Mike?